a man who would become a legend long before the world knew his name. Ernesto Che Guevara, a doctor, a traveler, a guerrilla, a revolutionary. From the dusty streets of Rosario to the mountains of Cuba, Che's life was shaped by a relentless pursuit of justice and the dream of a world transformed. Buckle up. This is the story of an icon, a legend, and a face that we all recognize. Che Guevara. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to a new episode of Past with a Punchline. In today's episode, we're going to discuss the rise of Che Guevara, his early life, and how he became the face of revolution all over the world. Ernesto Guevara was born on June 14, 1928 in Rosario, Argentina. He grew up in a comfortable middle-class family but suffered from chronic asthma. Despite this, young Ernesto was energetic, curious, and fiercely intelligent. He pursued medicine at the University of Buenos Aires, training to become a doctor, with focus on treating leprosy and rural health. While he graduated in 1953, he never truly practiced medicine. His journey across South America convinced him that prescribing medicine was not enough. For him, curing the disease of injustice required a far more radical treatment, revolution. In 1952, he embarked on a journey that would shape his destiny, a motorcycle trip across South America. Traversing deserts, mountains, and rivers, Ernesto witnessed grinding poverty, starvation, and social injustice in rural communities. This journey opened his eyes to the inequality of Latin America and ignited his revolutionary spirit. He wrote in his diaries about the injustices that he saw, concluding that true change required actions and not passive observation. It was a turning point, transforming him from a young doctor in training into a man prepared to fight for the oppressed. After traveling through Guatemala and witnessing the overthrow of a reformist government by a US-baked coup, Ernesto's convictions hardened. And by 1955, he had arrived in Mexico City, a gathering point for exiles and revolutionaries across Latin America. And it was here where fate introduced him to a young Cuban lawyer in exile, Fidel Castro. Their first meeting was legendary. Fidel outlined in meticulous detail his plan to overthrow Cuban dictator Batista. He spoke for hours with unstoppable passion, and most men would have dismissed it as fantasy. Che listened silently, smoking, then asked sharp, probing questions. And by the end of the night, he simply declared, "I'm in." And from that moment, a partnership was forged. Fidel was the charismatic leader who could inspire the masses, and Che was the disciplined strategist, the man who gave the revolution moral weight. Their differences, Fidel's pragmatism and Che's idealism, created a balance that would prove decisive. In December 1956, Che joined 81 rebels aboard the yacht Grandma, sailing from Mexico to Cuba, and the journey was disastrous. Seasickness, overcrowding, and poor planning left them vulnerable. When they finally landed, Batista's troops ambushed them, and out of the original 82, fewer than 20 survived. Amongst them were Fidel, his brother Raul, and Che. Che was wounded, but refused to abandon his comrades. As both a doctor and a fighter, he carried medicine in one hand and a rifle in the other. His courage and determination cemented his position at Fidel's side, not just as a medic, but as a revolutionary commander. The rebels retreated into the Sierra Maestra Mountains, where they would launch a 2-year guerrilla campaign, and life was brutal. Exhaustion, disease, and the constant threat of Batista's soldiers. But it was then when Che distinguished himself. He imposed strict discipline, forbidding theft or abuse of peasants. He set up makeshift clinics to treat the sick and wounded, and he demonstrated tactical brilliance, ambushing Batista's forces with hit-and-run attacks that maximized their small numbers. Che was more than just a fighter. He became Fidel's most trusted lieutenant. When morale dipped, Fidel turned to Che to restore order. When a risky mission was needed, Che volunteered. And their bond grew not just out of ideology, but out of shared hardships. By late 1958, Che was leading a decisive columns of rebel across Cuba. His bold assault on the city of Santa Clara derailed Batista's last defense. Trains carrying weapons were captured, enemy soldiers surrendered, and Batista's army collapsed. On January 1, 1959, Batista fled Cuba, and Fidel's forces entered Havana victorious. And Che Guevara was transformed from an unknown Argentine doctor into one of the most recognizable commanders of the revolution. Che's role in the revolution was not just military. His discipline, sacrifice, and willingness to share the burden of the men under him earned him deep respect. He had lived the ideals he preached, and his authenticity made him a hero, not just for Cubans, but to oppressed people across Latin America. With victory secured, Fidel had the monumental task of governing, and he turned immediately into the man who could trust the most. Che became the president of the National Bank, despite having no backgrounds in finance. It was because Fidel trusted his integrity. And later, he was appointed as Minister of Industry, where he worked tirelessly to reorganize Cuba's economy. But beyond administration, Fidel also relied on Che as an international envoy, sending him abroad to represent Cuba on the world stage. And the relationship after the revolution revealed their contrasts as well. Fidel thrives in politics, enjoying the give and take of leaderships, while Che was restless, impatient with bureaucracy, and always looking outward to spread the revolution beyond Cuba. Yet the trust between them never wavered. Fidel valued Che as the conscience of the revolution, the man that reminded him that their success in the revolution was only one step in a much larger struggle. Che Guevara's philosophy combined practicality and idealism. He believed that revolution required discipline, moral authority, and sacrifice. Military victories were important, but shaping a new society and inspiring ethical responsibility were equally vital. He often spoke about creating a new man, a citizen motivated not by profit, but by collective duty and solidarity. This vision shaped Cuba's early reforms and inspired revolutionaries worldwide. By the early 1960s, Che Guevara stood as Fidel Castro's closest ally and one of the most important figures in Cuba. He had fought with courage, helped topple a dictatorship, and taken on the immense responsibility of building a new society. And this chapter in his life ends not in a defeat or uncertainty, but in triumph. And Che Guevara, the young Argentine who once dreamt of justice on a motorcycle, had become a revolutionary leader who changed the destiny of a nation. But for Che, Cuba was only the beginning. His restless spirit would soon carry him beyond Cuba's shores, into Africa, Bolivia, and ultimately into a legend, which what we will discuss in next week's episode and in part 2 of our Guevara series. This is the end of today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you have any more ideas for me to cover in the next episodes, leave it in the comments. Until next time.